The dust of the Carven Mountains was a particular kind of grit, fine and pale, that clung to sweat and tasted of chalk. It coated the inside of Anya's mouth as she stood, spine rigid, in the central compound of Outpost K7. Around her, a ring of soldiers leered, their uniforms a dull gray against the baked mud walls. The order, barked by Sergeant Vic, still hung in the scorching air. Strip. Now. We inspect all insurgents for hidden markings. Anya was not an insurgent. She was a geologist, captured 3 days ago while mapping remote seismic faults. Her protests, her credentials, all of it had been crumpled and discarded like useless paper. This was the frontier zone, where Commander Gregor's word was law, and the law had become a blunt instrument of paranoia. Her hands trembled as they went to the buttons of her worn field shirt. To refuse meant a bullet. Survival was a calculation now, a cold ledger of humiliation versus breath. The fabric parted, the shirt falling into the dust. She kept her eyes on the horizon, where the mountains shimmered in the heat, a place of clean lines and ancient silence, so far removed from this human filth. A harsh laugh came from her left as she struggled with her trousers. She focused on a single memory, her grandmother's voice, steady and low, singing an old lullaby as her fingers traced patterns on Anya's back. The memory was a sanctuary. Finally, she stood in only her boots and undergarments, the sun branding her skin. All of it. Vic snarled. She closed her eyes, unhooked the last barrier, and let it fall. The catcalls were immediate, a wave of crude noise that made her skin crawl. But then, a sudden, deafening silence descended. It was so absolute she could hear the flag snapping on its pole. She felt the weight of a new gaze, different from the others, heavy, intent, and cold. She dared to turn her head. Commander Gregor had emerged from his command hut. He was a bear of a man, with a scar bisecting one eyebrow, known for his ruthlessness. He was not looking at her body. His eyes were locked on her spine. His face, usually an impassive mask of military discipline, underwent a terrifying transformation. The color drained from his weathered cheeks. His jaw went slack. The clipboard he was carrying slipped from his fingers, clattering on the hard ground. He took a stumbling step forward, then another, as if pushed by an unseen force. The soldiers' jeers died in their throats, confusion rippling through them. Gregor moved like a man in a trance, circling her, his eyes never leaving the tattoo that began at the base of her neck and traveled down the length of her spine. It was not a decorative piece. It was a complex, elegant script, an archaic language of interlocking symbols and geometric nodes, inked in a deep, blue-black ink that seemed to swallow the sunlight. It was the story of her lineage, the very one her grandmother's fingers had traced. To anyone else, it was just strange markings. To Commander Gregor, it was a ghost made flesh. He stopped in front of her, his breath coming in short, ragged bursts. His voice, when it finally came, was a hoarse whisper that carried in the quiet. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, but the force was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like fear. Anya lifted her chin, meeting his shocked stare with a flicker of her own defiance. "It was a gift," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "From my grandmother. Era of the Silver Vein." At the name, Gregor flinched as if struck. He took a hurried step back, barking an order that was pure panic. "Cover her. Now. Bring her to my private quarters untouched, do you hear me? Untouched." He turned and almost fled back to his hut, leaving a compound full of bewildered men and a woman standing naked in the dust, understanding that the tattoo on her spine was not just history. It was a key. And it had just unlocked a door she never knew existed. The private quarters of Commander Gregor were a stark contrast to the brutal simplicity of the outpost. Here were woven rugs, real paper books on shelves, and a scent of sandalwood that couldn't mask the underlying smell of fear. Anya, now wrapped in a coarse military blanket, sat on a hard chair, watching the man who held her life in his hands pace like a caged animal. The shock on his face had solidified into a deep, agitated dread. He finally stopped, pouring 2 glasses of amber liquor with unsteady hands. He shoved one toward her. "Drink." She didn't move. "Who was Era to you?" she asked, her core still trembling but her voice under tight control. Gregor downed his drink in one gulp. Era of the Silver Vein was not just your grandmother, he said, his eyes distant, fixed on a past only he could see. She was a keeper. A historian of the old ways, from the time before the Central Authority, before the wars fractured the continent. The script on your back, it is the litany of blood and stone. It records the lineages of the founding families, their treaties, their burial sites, and their hidden repositories. He looked at her, his gaze piercing. Your family were not geologists. They were guardians. Cartographers of secrets far more valuable than seismic faults. Anya's mind reeled. Her grandmother's gentle stories, her father's obsessive travels to remote ruins, her own academic path, all of it clicked into a terrifying new configuration. She thought of the lullaby, the patterns. They were maps. And you, she pressed. How do you know this? Gregor's shoulders slumped. My name is not Gregor. It is Kalen. Son of Myron, of the Iron River Line. He pointed a thick finger at her spine, visible through the blanket's drape. That symbol there, the node that looks like a teardrop within a mountain, that is the sigil of my house. Our families were bound. Your line kept the knowledge. Mine were sworn to protect the keepers. A pact made centuries ago. He laughed, a bitter, broken sound. I broke that pact. I wanted a modern life, a career, power. I turned my back on the old ways, changed my name, joined the authority. I thought the past was dead. I thought all the keepers were gone. He stared at her, raw anguish in his eyes. Until I saw the living record on your spine. I didn't just betray my oath, Anya. I almost executed my charge. The last keeper. The weight of his confession filled the room. Anya's humiliation in the yard transformed into a cold, rising fury. Your protection, she spat. Your men forced me to strip in front of a mob. Your authority would have had me shot as a rebel. Shame flushed his face. A blindness I will carry to my grave. But, you are alive. And, that script, it is more than a family tree. The Central Authority is not just hunting rebels. They are scavenging the land for old world technology, power sources, weapons. They have fragments of legends about the keepers. If they ever decipher what you carry, he didn't need to finish. Anya understood. She was a living treasure map, and a very powerful, very ruthless group was looking for the treasure. What do we do? She whispered, the we feeling strange and inevitable. Gregor Kalen leaned forward, the soldier returning to his eyes. We run. But, not blindly. The litany is a guide. You must learn to read it. Not with your eyes, he tapped his temple, but with your blood. Your grandmother's song, the stories, they are the cipher. We need to find the first cache. It will have supplies, more information. It is our only chance. That night, in a locked room, Anya began the agonizing process of remembering. She hummed the lullaby, her fingers pressing against her own skin, feeling the raised ink of the tattoo. And, as she did, the symbols began to shift in her mind's eye, not as words, but as landscapes, as directions. The first node, the teardrop within a mountain, wasn't just the Iron River sigil. It pointed to a specific place, the Silver Vein, her grandmother's namesake, a played-out mine 200 miles to the north. A place where her childhood had been spent, and where a secret now waited. The journey to the Silver Vein was a brutal lesson in trust and terrain. They traveled not as commander and prisoner, but as fugitives. Kalen had staged her escape, leaving a trail suggesting she'd killed a guard and fled into the night. He followed hours later, in pursuit. Their mode of transport was a rusted, pre-war crawler, its engine a persistent cough against the vast silence of the desert. Anya spent the hours cross-referencing her geological survey maps with the patterns unfolding in her memory. The tattoo was a living, reactive thing. When she focused on a symbol while looking at a land feature, it would sometimes throb with a faint, warm pulse. It was a disturbing, intimate GPS. Kalen was a grim, driven companion, his guilt a wall between them. He spoke little, but his eyes constantly scanned the horizons, not just for authority patrols, but for signs he remembered from stories told by a fireside a lifetime ago. The old ways were not about magic, he said one evening as they sheltered in a canyon. They were about deep observation. The keepers encoded knowledge into stories and art so it would survive regimes and burnings. Your tattoo is a masterpiece of that tradition. It responds to your lineage, your intent. The authority could skin you and still not understand it. It needs the key, the living memory. Anya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert night. They reached the outskirts of the Silver Vein region, not a single mine, but a jagged scar across the earth, a labyrinth of abandoned shafts and crumbling processing plants. Using the tattoo as a guide, Anya led them to a seemingly unremarkable air shaft, long sealed with a rusted grate. The symbol on her lower back, a spiral that echoed the drill patterns of the core samples, burned with insistence here. With effort, they pried the grate open. The descent was into absolute blackness, the air cool and smelling of whetstone and age. Their headlamps cut swaths through the darkness, revealing not a mine tunnel, but a constructed corridor, its walls smooth and lined with the same blue-black pigment of her tattoo. At its end was a circular door made of a dull, non-reflective metal. There was no handle, no keyhole. In the center was an indentation, a perfect negative of the spinal tattoo. Anya's breath caught. This was it. The moment of truth. She turned, presenting her back to the door. Kaylin helped her align the tattoo with the impression. As the ink made contact with the cold metal, a series of clicks and hums resonated through the chamber. Lines of soft, blue light traced the symbols on the door, which then irised open with a sigh of equalizing pressure. Inside was not a treasure trove of gold, but a library of the lost. Shelves held scrolls of treated leather and crystal data slates. There were cabinets with strange, elegant tools. And, in the center, on a pedestal, lay a single, heavy pistol of unknown design, and, beside it, a smaller, simpler version of the spinal tattoo, this one a flexible, metallic sleeve. As Anya picked it up, it slithered onto her forearm, aligning itself with her pulse point. Words formed in her mind, not her own, identity confirmed. Keeper Era's heir. Welcome. This was not just a cache. It was a relay station. The information flooding her through the arm sleeve was overwhelming, locations of other caches, the true history of the authorities' rise, a history of theft and betrayal, and a warning. The Central Authority was not just searching randomly. They had a defector. A former low-level keeper who had given them just enough information to know the litany existed, and that it was physical. They were getting closer. As this revelation settled, Kaylin was studying a map on one of the crystal slates. His face hardened. "They're here," he said quietly. "At the surface. They must have tracked the crawler's signature or followed my own trail." They could hear the distant echo of boots on metal, voices shouting commands. The authority had found the entrance. They were trapped in a sanctuary that had just become a tomb. The cool blue light of the archive now felt like the glow of a trap. The voices from the shaft grew louder, accompanied by the sharp, electronic beeps of scanning equipment. Kaylin moved with a soldier's swiftness, gathering a handful of the crystal data slates and stuffing them into a padded satchel. He tossed the strange pistol to Anya. "Point, think of a target, and squeeze. It has no recoil." She fumbled with the weapon, its weight alien in her hand. The metallic sleeve on her arm shimmered, projecting a faint, holographic schematic of the archive itself onto the wall, highlighting a ventilation duct hidden behind one of the bookcases. "This way," she hissed. Together, they shoved the heavy case aside, revealing a narrow, dark passage just as the first black-helmeted authority soldier rappelled into the chamber from the main shaft. Kaylin didn't hesitate. He fired 3 shots from his service rifle, not at the soldier, but at the ancient, brittle supports near the chamber's entrance. A shower of rock and dust cascaded down, partially blocking the doorway and buying them precious seconds. They scrambled into the duct, crawling on hands and knees through suffocating darkness. The sleeve on Anya's arm provided a subtle, directional glow, guiding them. They could hear the enraged shouts and the sound of digging from behind. The duct emptied into a secondary mining tunnel, long abandoned and half-flooded with icy, stagnant water. For hours, they slogged through the subterranean maze, the sleeve's guidance their only compass. It was during this grim journey that the sleeve began to feed Anya more than just directions. In flashes of imagery and emotion, it showed her the final days of her grandmother, Era. She saw Era, younger, hiding this very archive, choosing to encode the master copy of the litany onto her infant granddaughter's skin, a final, desperate act of preservation. She felt her grandmother's fear, her determination, and her profound love, a love so strong it used Anya's very body as its vessel. Anya wasn't just carrying information, she was carrying a legacy of sacrifice. Exhausted, they finally emerged at dawn on the far side of the mountain range, miles from the Silver Vein entrance. They were in a high, remote valley, a place not on any of Anya's official maps. According to the sleeve, this was a designated safe haven, a way station. It was little more than a natural cave with a shielded spring, but it had been stocked centuries ago with preserved food, basic medical supplies, and, more importantly, a communication console that linked to other, hidden way stations. As Kaylin kept watch, Anya interfaced with the console using her sleeve. For the first time, she sent out a pulsed signal, a keeper's distress call on a frequency no modern scanner would detect. The response was not immediate, but a status light blinked green. Message received. Stand by. They were not alone. But the relief was short-lived. Kaylin, scouting the ridge, returned with a grim expression. He pointed east. In the distance, a sleek, vertical takeoff authority aircraft was circling, its sensors doubtless probing the valley. Their flight from the mine had been tracked. They were being hunted by technology that far outstripped their own. The sanctuary of the cave now felt exposed. They had to keep moving, but to where? The next cache indicated by the sleeve was even more remote, deep in the frozen wastes to the north, a place called the Glacier of Echoes. To survive the journey, they would need more than preserved rations. They would need to become ghosts, to use the land in the way the old ways taught, to hide not just in space, but, in plain sight, using the rhythms of the earth itself. And, they would have to confront the fact that the authorities' defector keeper knew enough to anticipate their moves. The hunt was no longer a chase. It was a duel across a chessboard of continents, with Anya's spine as the board. The trek north was a descent into a new kind of hell, where the searing dust was replaced by biting wind and blinding white. Anya learned to read the tattoo and the sleeve in tandem, not just as a map, but as a survival manual. It taught her to find lichen that could ward off frostbite, to sense subsurface ice flows, to predict the deadly, clear-sky blizzards that swept down from the peaks. Kaylin, shedding his Commander Gregor persona fully, revealed the skills of his heritage: silent movement, trapping, building shelters that vanished against the snow. The guilt between them thawed slowly, forged into a hardened, respectful partnership by shared hardship. They were no longer keeper and oathbreaker, but two jagged pieces of a broken shield, trying to fit back together. The messages through the waystation network grew more frequent. They were not from other keepers, those lines were mostly silent, confirming their near extinction. The responses came from descendants of the protector families, like Kaylin, scattered across the frontier, living quiet lives but still holding a spark of the old loyalty. A network was stirring, a whisper of resistance rekindled by the confirmed survival of a true keeper. One night, in the lee of a massive ice sheet, the sleeve projected a critical message. It was from a contact codenamed Forge, who operated a scrapyard near the northern rail terminus. The message contained a fragment of intercepted authority communication. The defector keeper had been identified, a man named Elian, from a minor branch of the record-keeping families. He had not given them the full cipher, but he had given them a location he believed was the ultimate prize, the Great Archive, rumored to hold not just history, but the means to dismantle the authorities' power grid. And his calculated destination for Anya was the same as hers, the Glacier of Echoes. It was a trap. But it was also an opportunity. They reached the glacier as another storm closed in. The entrance was a vertical crevasse that appeared, according to the sleeve, only when the sun hit a specific ice prism at a specific angle. They had to wait, exposed, for a break in the cloud cover. It was during this wait that the authority found them. Not with aircraft, but with silent, white-clad Spec Ops soldiers emerging from the storm like ghosts. A firefight erupted, stark and violent in the silent snowscape. Kalen took a glancing shot to the leg, going down hard. Anya, using the strange pistol, found its function. It emitted a concussive pulse that shattered ice and bone alike. She fought with a ferocity born of desperation, covering Kalen as he dragged himself toward the crevasse. The sun broke through, a single lance of light hitting the ice wall. A hidden doorway, etched with the full, sprawling pattern of her tattoo, shimmered into existence. With a final, sweeping shot that triggered a small avalanche, Anya bought them time. She half-carried Kalen into the glowing entrance just as the ice door began to reseal. Inside the Glacier of Echoes was not an archive of paper or crystal. It was a chamber of light. The entire history of the Keepers was stored in beams of coherent energy, weaving through the ancient ice, telling their story in a silent, beautiful symphony. And, in the center stood Elian. He was an old, frail-looking man, his eyes hungry behind thick glasses. He was not with authority soldiers. He was alone. "You are too late, child," he said, his voice echoing. "I have already sent the core coordinates to the authority. They will be here within the hour. They promised me a place in their new world. A world of order, not of dusty secrets." Anya faced him, the sleeve on her arm blazing with light, connecting to the energy of the chamber. "You traded our soul for a comfortable cage," she said. She didn't need to consult the tattoo or the sleeve now. The truth was in the light around her. The Great Archive was not a weapon. It was a heart. A record of balance, of symbiosis with the planet. To use it as a weapon would be to destroy it. The authority, seeking a power source, would rip it apart and find nothing but dead ice. She made a choice. She raised her arm, and, through the sleeve, she issued a command to the archive, not a call to arms, but a command to sleep. To scatter its energy signature into the planetary magnetic field, to become invisible once more. The light in the chamber began to dim, the weaving beams dissolving. Elian screamed in frustration, lunging at her. A single shot rang out. Kalen, leaning against the wall, his rifle steady, had fired. Elian fell. The archive went dark, save for the soft glow from Anya's sleeve. The trap had been sprung, but the prize had vanished. When the authority forces finally blasted their way in hours later, they found only an empty ice cave, 3 bodies, Elia's and 2 of their own scouts left from the firefight, and no source of power. The mission was logged as a failure, a costly pursuit of rebel fugitives based on faulty intelligence. Far away, in another hidden way station, Anya tended to Kalen's wound. The network was alive. They were few, but they were awake. She looked at the data slate before her, a copy of the litany she had made from her own living record. It was no longer just a map to hidden caches. It was a manifesto, a history, and a guide to a different way of living. The authority had sought to erase the past to control the future. But Anya, the living record, had survived. The story was not over. It was just being rewritten, one whispered message, one awakened protector, at a time. The fight would no longer be for a weapon, but for memory itself. And she was its keeper.